One of the things I am fascinated by is the concept of value. We talk about value. Value. Oh, okay. How's that?
Am I on? Now I'm on. The voice.
Remember to turn that off when you go to the bathroom.
I'm very fascinated by the concept of value. Value, we can find something, a Rembrandt painting, for instance, and we all go to the Frick and we look at this beautiful painting. The Rembrandt commission comes out a year later. It's no longer worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's a lot of issues around authenticity around value. Another place where we see value is somebody could be crawling across the desert, going, water, and you come up and you go, hey, I got a Rembrandt painting. Would you give me $1 million for it? And you're like, no, I give you $1 million for water. Because in that context, water is a lot more valuable, right? And value is something we can build a castle, a beautiful, huge house. We can drill a hole in the roof, and water gets in, and you get black fungus, and the value just disappears overnight. Value is very difficult to build, and yet so very easy to destroy. So I'm sort of fascinated by value, and that our job as marketers is, in fact, to create value. But marketing suffers from a horrible sort of identity crisis. I know that most of us here identify with being marketers and community managers and marketing. I have my friends over there. But so many of us think of marketers as as madman guys, right? Guys who are trying to trick people into buying things or doing interesting, creative things. Or they think of marketing in terms of advertising. We get this confused with marketing too, in the world of advertising. Or the idea of a salesperson, and the Fuller Brushman who sells the hairbrush to us fellow walking thumbs. They'll do that. That's what salespeople do. So many people think of marketers in these terms, and I think it's a horrible identity crisis, because really, at its very best, what marketers do is create value. And so a lot of what I want to talk about here is love. That's a beautiful statement. But what I want to talk about is, as marketers and dealing with social media, we have this wonderful opportunity to dive into the depths and riches of what social media is about, to do marketing that really contains a lot more value. And what that means is to get into things that have to do with psychology, sociology, ethnography. These are wonderful opportunities. Now, one of the first things I found that was a very big challenge was all the social media platforms are constantly changing. To stay on top of this stuff is a day in, day out job. We have to eat, drink, and sleep social media. But one of the things we found is that if we back up and look at the patterns inherent in social media platforms, it becomes a little bit easier. So we have the concept, for instance, of identity that is a pattern that we see in social media. The idea of patterns comes from the software world, where, for instance, an e-commerce site, you always have to check out, things happen in a certain way, and those are called design patterns. Social media possesses design patterns. So profile is one. The ability to have relationships, which, by the way, does not exist in all social media platforms, some more than others. Conversations, can we actually have a conversation going back and forth? We have groups. You might look at Netflix and say Netflix is a fabulous social media platform, but you can't really create groups in Netflix. So as a social media platform, it's very weak in that concept. We have gaming, and what I mean by that is gamification. And gamification frequently includes little rewards, little payoffs. They give you a shot. Is that me? This thing? Sorry, folks. You get little payoffs that create a dopamine rush. We have presence. Is somebody there or not? We can tell when somebody's on Facebook who shows up. I can chat with them on Twitter. I can't unless they're actually tweeting. Curation. We most certainly have curation. Reputation. Is there an element? What was it?
After all this time, you would think you could mic that properly.
I did. And then finally get So if I take Twitter, for instance, and apply the social pyramid to the concept of Twitter, we find that Twitter has a very strong sense of identity. You have your profile.
You have conversations. And so I'm going to use the color pink to show that on a scale of 1 to 10, it's very strong. We have curation. And then sort of in a middle place, or excuse me, in a very weak place, you don't really have gaming on Twitter or presence or reputation. And then sort of in the middle somewhere, we do have relationships and groups. You can create groups on Twitter using hashtags. It's sort of a weak feature. And then finally, gifting. When we retweet, it is gifting. And the rule of reciprocity is so powerful in human psychology that we're somewhat guided by this idea of gifting. And we know that retweeting is gifting because often when you retweet, you say, thank you. Thank you. Another way to look at social platforms, a way that helps you keep from being overwhelmed by them, is to look at them in terms of being an ecosystem. Now, if anybody's been watching LinkedIn in the past 6 months, you'll know that it's completely transformed. And if you're watching it on a daily basis, you might even be somewhat confused. And by thinking of it in terms of an ecosystem, it can help you understand the platform better. And I use these as illustrations just to show that as marketers, it's somewhat our job to really dive in and look at these things in a deeper way, and that will help guide our marketing efforts. Now, one of the things that I frequently see confusion about in social media marketing, everybody says, well, we're doing social media marketing. It's like one big thing, right? But social media marketing is not one big thing. There's about 5 major different approaches to social media marketing, I'd posit to you. And the first is brand maintenance. And brand maintenance is simply taking care of your company. You're listening, somebody's saying something, I may respond, right? I have certainly accounts there. I'm not really doing a lot. That's the basic, fundamental social media marketing is maintenance. Another is community. Ted Rubin's favorite word, community. Because what we get into a community can be a community of customers, it can be a community of people who share our passions. A lot of ways brand ambassador programs are community work. We can join communities, we can lead communities. That's a whole approach to social media marketing in and of itself. Succinctly different than brand maintenance. So that's 2 major approaches to social media marketing. Now there is influence marketing. This is frequently seen in B2B and professional services. I may create a list of 20 influencers that I want to follow. They don't know me from Adam. Now, I'm going to do what I call professional stalking, not amateur stalking. That's what this is. Amateur stalking, every time Sam Fiorello gives me a joke, I laugh. Ha! He's like, that's rather obvious. They're funny. Thank you. That's amateur stalking. Professional stalking is I'm going to only laugh at a few jokes here and there. But I'm going to listen to your blog posts. I'm going to retweet you. I'm going to engage and have a relationship. And over time, you're going to go, hey, who's this Ric Dragon fellow? And we may start a relationship. And I can measure that. That's a particular form of social media marketing in and of itself. One of my favorites. Reputation. Reputation also includes thought leadership as a form of social media marketing. So writing books, speaking at conferences, that's thought leadership, that's reputation, style of social media that we do, right? That's the 4th type of social media. And then finally, the one that we all think about when we think of social media marketing are the big splash campaigns. That's the Old Spice campaign, that's Pepsi Refresh. These are things that make the news. They're really great at building audience, building a lot of connections very quickly. They don't build community. They don't help you influence in a big way. They're not about thought leadership. It is a succinctly different approach to social media. So remember, there's 5 different approaches to social media marketing. It's not all the same. So one of the things I want to walk you through is our framework for social media marketing. That, in fact, my book is based on. And what I found out was after I wrote the book, some 6 months later, I'm thinking about it. And what it really is a whole system approach to marketing. We're looking at the entire ecosystem of the brand, the customer, the marketplace, and working from there. I spoke to marketers all across the world. People at very large companies like SAP and Intel, people at small companies. Everybody agreed. The first thing that everything was missing in social media marketing was this sense of goals, of desired outcomes. When we talk about it in terms of desired outcomes, it's a little more than goals. The second part is us, who we are as a brand. We're going to dive into it in a deeper, more fundamental way than we would would normally. There's them, those people, customers, constituents, audience, users, whatever we want to call them. They exist within communities. And then finally, those communities have influencers. We can enter into that loop at any different phase if we already understand what one of those components is for our brand. And then finally, based on that work, we can create a social media marketing plan, a strategy. But we have to go through those steps. Now, desired outcomes, I start with purpose. I'll sit down with a CEO or an executive of a company and really talk about the underlying purpose of the business. Now, every so often, marketers, you'll go and speak to an executive to say, hey, what's your purpose? Hey, make money. And that's when you know you're in trouble. Making money is great, but hopefully a business has a bigger purpose and reason for existing. You want to suss that out. Sometimes you really have to have conversations with people. You want to find out the leadership's vision for that organization and really get that down. We're going to talk about goals. Oh wait, goals and objectives. Is anybody here confused about the difference between goals and objectives? Nobody?
I am.
Yeah, right? Don't feel bad. Before 1960, the terms were reversed. Since Michael Porter wrote about goals and objectives so much, a goal was something in the distance, it was a little fuzzy, and you had many concrete objectives leading up to the goal. My mnemonic is a football field. I got the goal at the end, and many objects, footballs leading up to that goal. But prior to 1960, the two were reversed. And objectives today mean things that are very measurable, very succinct, that lead up to that fuzzier, more goal. And then finally, we have the metrics that make up these things. So when we're in this phase of the project, we really sit down with the team, with the executives, with whoever's behind the brand, the company, and identify what these things are. Sometimes you say, hey, what do you want out of this marketing project? Oh, we want a 10% increase, we want to hold our edge, we want to take over the number 3 spot. They'll say a lot of things. I frequently love to ask the question from a CEO. I say, listen, in a year from now, you're going to go to the liquor store and buy a $1,000 bottle of champagne, or brandy, or bourbon. And you're going to come back and share it with me. What happened? Sometimes by putting things in those types of questions helps them come up with better answers. But I'll really suss these things out. We create these big matrices of metrics. It's a core component of the job. The next thing we get into is us. Who are we? Now, back in the old day, you still had to understand, in traditional marketing, we really got into brand voice, brand identity, but nowhere to the extent that we need to today, because in social media marketing, you have to have a more clarified sense of brand identity. We did a funny thing. We created a board of photographs of various people, and we went out on the streets, and we said, bear with me a minute, if Starbucks was to wake up one morning and get out of bed, this is the pretend part. Starbucks woke up, got out of bed, ate some cereal, walked across town, knocked on your door, you opened the door, who would you be? And we show these board of photographs. And the majority of people pointed to the photograph of what we call the soccer mom. Starbucks is a soccer mom. Who would have thought? Google was what we called the hip young Asian guy, which is amazing because neither of the founders of Google were either. BP, this is shortly after the deep horizon oil spill. We could have put a photograph of Basil Bob himself, they would have pointed to that, but he got the grumpy old middle-aged guy. The point of the exercise was that people do project persona, personality onto brands, and as marketers, we can help to craft and shape the personality that we want to have. Now, we'll create a brand personality document. Very, very in-depth. I love to put examples of good, positive social media communications, and I love to keep examples of crappy ones. I think I've got an example here of one in my own company where an employee, put a tweet or a Facebook post, and he says, at times I've been accused of being a bit of an oddball geek artist type. I'm a video guy. And we're like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not our brand voice. A, we don't speak from the point of view of this is my company, this isn't for everybody. And there's certain things that we don't do. So we collect these examples when we see them that don't represent our brand voice so that the team can see what they are. And we like to put up nice positive ones that we think do. So that ultimately results in a brand voice or brand personality value. So we start off with desired outcomes. We really suss out who we are. Now we're going to talk about them, who they are as a customer. Now, one of the things we do is something called a micro-audience or micro-segmentation piece of work. It's a brainstorm. So we'll have a bunch of people at a table just like this with a whiteboard, and we'll start with the central premise of who should care. Who should give effing anything about this brand or this website or whatever we're doing. And in this particular example, we're working for a nonprofit that helps musicians in need. So we start off with the premise, people who care about people in music. We then found out that there were these branches. We find, well, there's people in music education, there's people who make instruments, people who put on music shows, people in the recording industry. So you start to see we're getting into these smaller groups of people who might care about people in music. And then we can really branch off. And one of my favorite examples was in this particular case, we talked about people in music education. And for music education, we went to the various music schools, including, of course, Berkeley, right? And could you believe it? There was a group of people at Berkeley that were into world music. Now that's a microsegment, right? Now, we found a smaller group that decided to go dancing every Thursday night. Now that's a microsegment. And when we really create a list of these small segments, put them in a document, it becomes the basis of our social media work ongoing. We can iterate through that list, find those small groups, find the low-hanging fruit, and target them in social media and start conversations with them, or do research around their communities and start conversations with them. And then later, if we feel like we want to light some fire to the program, we can go back to that list and find new groups. So that creates the micro-segmentation plan. Now, we do research. Deep, deep research. Where are those people already online? Where have they formed communities? Another favorite of mine was for a company that made little black boxes that went into conference rooms and hospitals to help the sound quality. Have you ever been in a hospital and you hear a doctor, please come to emergency room? Like, who? What? Or on a subway in New York City? What stop is this? Well, those people made the technology to make that better. And in the research, we found that there was a group of people on LinkedIn that were all into what's called healthcare environment creation. There were architects and whatnot that made better healthcare environments, and they found that sound was a core component. So by doing that homework, we found that group. So that type of research, or what we call ethnography, ethnography, is the sense of really studying people online. This is succinctly different than what Margaret Mead did, with teenagers in Samoa. Because a problem with real-life ethnography is you're studying people and it changes their behavior. Whereas when you're studying people online, you don't have that problem so much. Now, in a typical project, I can spend hours doing hours doing that research, teams of people doing that research, and really dig in. You can actually people. What are they saying about their topics of matter? And that creates community researchers. When you do that, you start to see who's influential within those communities. How are they talking? What are they doing? Sam mentioned some of the online tools and how they're not really so useful. They can be useful just to find people. Google is a great tool for finding influencers. I'll use any tool I possibly can to find people who are influential around a certain subject. So that creates influencer research. So all of these things, ultimately, we might also do competitive research, but all of this leads into the creation of the social media action plan. Now what's interesting, you will find that if you go through this entire system of working on your brand or your company, you will be able to make a social media plan much easier. You really understand the whole picture of the entire system. So the other thing you should think about are the resources available to you, both on your marketing team and in the company itself, or other people who may engage in social on your behalf. If you're a nonprofit, it may be an external team. Which of those 5 big approaches that I talked about earlier how would you allocate to your own brand each of those approaches? How much of each major activity type, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, distribution across different social media platforms. Here's a worksheet we'll frequently use for brands. Highly recommended. We think about those 5 big approaches to social media. How would you apply a percentage or pie to your own organization? So in one organization, you might say, look, we're going to spend half of our time doing brand maintenance, and the rest of the time we're going to do influence marketing. Or some other mix. The activity types, the major 4 activity types. Listen, you go create profiles. And by the way, create profiles on all the social platforms before some teenage kid does. And then later on you want that Tumblr page, but you can't because some kid has the name. Netflix did that. They found that problem when they tried to rebrand their organization, but the kid who was really into smoking pot already had the name on Twitter. We're going to create connections. The whole activity of connection building is a succinct activity within social media marketing work and community management. Getting followers, getting friends, following people, getting followed. It is a part of the work. The next thing is actually creating content. And then finally, once you share content out there, to engage with people. So those are your 4 major activity types. If you cycle through, you will find out, sure, we've done our profile building. Now we may move around from that creating of connections, content, engagement, back to making more connections. Now, in a particular quarter or month, you may find that the preponderance of your effort is going to be spent on 1 or 2 of these areas. And then by the 4th quarter of the year, gee, we're doing more in the content and engagement world. So you can use this worksheet to think through how you're going to allocate your effort across each of the major platforms, blogging, Twitter, Facebook. And then within each of those, you can think how much effort, what percentage of effort do we want to spend on the 4 major activity types. It's another great worksheet. By the way, if you tweet me at Ric Dragon, I'm happy to share a link to some templates that you can use yourself so you don't have to write all this down. So you see, each of those things we went through. We created all these plans. We create the great big plan. So then we're actually going to do the work. We're going to, the team has to actually be active, doing the social media work itself. We're going to measure it. How is it meeting our measurements and our objectives, our metrics, and then we can improve upon it. So it's a very simple cycle, a normal cycle of process management. Umair Haque of Harvard University, a great book called The New Capitalist Manifesto. And he said, basically, a hamburger that you buy at McDonald's. By the way, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't know this firsthand. But I think they're like, what, $4 or $5? Can anybody confirm? Meat eaters here? But the real cost to society of a hamburger is about $35. You buy a hamburger for $5, it costs society about $35. And money given to farms, transportation, cost to health across the nation, cost to the ecosystem, the ecology, all of these different things. There's a real cost to society. He calls that thin value. Thick value is when you create something that actually adds to the community and is sustainable, a bigger profit. And he talks about thin value versus thick value. And I posit to you as marketers, our great opportunity is through social is to create thick value, create more value than what existed before. Our work is actually very noble. A friend of mine works at a major marketing agency, and I said, you've got the dream job. What can I find you working for? She said, I'm about saving starving children in Kenya. Wrong. You're helping people have more sustainable jobs. You're helping companies thrive and flourish. You're helping those people then send their families and kids to college. So as marketers, we have a noble endeavor. Thank you.